Hi, my name is Emily and I'm the creator behind Peach and Honey Studio, and I'm super excited to be a part of this fall festival and showing off my latest fall project, which is a pair of quilted sneakers. I've seen these all over Instagram, and ever since I saw them, I knew I wanted to make them. I thought it was such a fun project, something that pushes me a little outside of my element of quilting. And you get a really cool sneaker that you can wear and show off and talk to people about. So let's dive in, and I'll tell you what you need to make your own set of quilted sneakers. You will first off need to buy the sneaker kit. So the sneaker kit will come with 2 soles, 2 inserts, and then it will also come with wax thread and a needle. You will need to have some fabric picked out. So you'll need an exterior fabric and an interior fabric. I'm a US size 7 in women's, and I was able to get away with about a half a yard. Obviously that changes depending on the size of the shoes that you're making. They do have kits for children, for men, so you can really go crazy and make whatever size. But the one thing I would recommend is having an idea of what you want to use for your fabric. Cut out the templates and lay it on top of the fabric to make sure you have enough. You will also need batting. You will need a pair of shoelaces, and you will need a eyelet tool, an eyelet punch, and you will also need some grommets. You will definitely need a point turner, a Sharpie, and I highly recommend having a stiletto on hand. This will make your life easier in the long run. And I would also recommend a thimble for when you're doing the hand sewing portion. And you'll also need a lighter or a set of matches to be able to burn your thread once you're done to close it off. And I'll show you exactly what that process looks like. Just be very careful when you're doing that. And then last but not least, you will need to go ahead and print out the templates. So when it comes to getting ready to quilt your fabric that you've selected, you have a couple of different options, and it really depends on how you would want to finish the sides of the sneaker. So option 1 would be to baste your 2 fabrics with the batting in between, like how you typically would. Go ahead and quilt that and have that panel ready to cut. The other option is you can just take your top fabric and you will just quilt it on the batting, leaving the backing / inside fabric out of the picture. If you do it this way, you can get a really nice finished edge. So for instance, here is my template. If you decide to quilt the panel all as one piece, so all 3 sandwiched together, you will either have to decide to serge that top edge, or you can do a bias binding. I don't really want to do either of those for this pair that I'm making, so I'm just going to be quilting the top panel with my batting. And so I'm going to head over to my sewing machine on my domestic and do some quilting. If you have a long arm, you get to pick out some really fun designs. I think I'm just going to do some grid quilting on this because the fabric, there's a lot going on. I want to keep it simple, and just make sure that you keep in mind the scale of your quilting. So if you look at this piece is going to be the side. So just keep this in mind. Like, obviously when you're cutting this out, you can kind of like fussy cut the section that you maybe want to have in there. But when you're thinking about your quilting, you want to make sure it's like a smaller scale quilting design, because you really want to be able to see it on the panels. So like I said, I'm just going to go ahead and do a grid. So I'm going to take this over, and I will be back once I get this quilted. The other thing I did want to mention about this project is there's really no great guideline for how much fabric you need, because everyone's shoe size is different. So what I would recommend is opening up your fabric, and I would lay all the pieces out that you plan on cutting out to make, and you can determine how much you actually need to quilt. So let me do that now. So really, I think from what I've seen, everyone calls for a yard. I don't think a yard is totally necessary, but if you really want to get intricate and do maybe some fussy cutting details, I think a yard would give you way more than enough, and it will give you some really cool options for picking out your selection of what you want to actually be cut out for your sneaker panel. So I really think I'm gonna be able to get away with a ½ yard of my fabric. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it so I can get it pressed and get it basted and quilted. So I'm gonna use my True Cut rotary cutter. I absolutely am in love with this because I tend to bulk cut a lot of my projects and put them in bins, and I often have experienced some wrist fatigue, and I had no idea why until I actually took a video of myself cutting using my regular rotary cutter, and I saw how I was angling my wrist to get leverage. 100% was the issue that I was having. So this really forces me to hold this ergonomically and not tweak up my wrist to get that pressure. This just naturally gives me the angle that I need. So I really, really enjoy cutting with this ruler, or cutting with this rotary cutter. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut my ½ yard and get this iron basted and quilted. Beautiful. Okay, so now that I have my panel quilted, I am taking my templates and I'm going to cut them out. You can see when you print these out, there's different lines. I cut off the top line that would make it a high top, and I'm gonna go with the mid. And I'm just gonna go ahead and punch a hole in the template so I can use my marker to mark these once that time comes, and I'm just using a stiletto to do this process. Once you have your template cut out, you're going to go ahead and tape these two panels together here. I'd probably recommend using Scotch tape, but I'm gonna use the washi tape I have. And you should have this little V open down at the bottom. Okay, so I have my templates together. I have my two pieces trimmed down, taped in the center, and I have the tongue. So I really want to do some fussy cutting here, but I think it's going to be a little bit tricky because I'm going to mark on the back side so it's easier to see. So what I'm going to do to kind of cheat the system a little bit so I can get this placed where I want is I'm just going to put a pin through here on each side so I know when I flip this over where I want to place this to get that print centered in the tongue. So I have this one pinned, and then I'll flip that around and trace that out. Okay, perfect. Now that I have this flipped over, I can see exactly where I wanted this to be. And I'm just going to go in here and pin this to this section. And I will come back and eventually trace this, but I want to get this locked in so I can figure out where I'm going to put my next panel for the side. Okay, so I'm going to take my erasable marker here. Honestly, I think you could get away with using just a regular marker to go ahead and trace this. I think even a Sharpie could be good. So I'm just going to outline the tongue, and I think it's important to pin it down so that way this isn't shifting on you as you trace it. So whether you want to use a pattern weight or you can pin it like how I did, I think either would be a good option. I think a Sharpie may be a little bit easier to use if you have one readily available. But okay, here is my first tongue. and I'm going to repeat this exact process for the second tongue. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start pinning this first panel. Try to keep this as flat as possible. Pinning is not my strong suit, so I'm normally not a pinner as a quilter. I've learned to pick my battles with pins, and probably should use them more often than I do, but just not a fan of stabbing myself. Okay, so here. Okay, once this is secure, we can go ahead and start tracing this. Okay, so now that I have all of my panels traced out, I'm gonna come in with my scissors and cut these out. You wanna leave at least like 1/2 inch to 1 inch around your line. So I'm gonna get these cut out. Okay, so at this stage you should have your left panel, your right panel. I just marked them on the corners so I wouldn't forget, and then you have your 2 tongues that you cut out. Okay, so now that I have my 4 panels cut out, I have my right side, my left side, and then I have my 2 tongue panels. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this 1 panel at a time. I will take my left panel, right sides together. Don't worry, my selvage will be cut off once I sew this on. I'm going to sew from this line all the way to this line, stop, back stitching at both beginning and ending, and then I'm going to do the same thing in this little V. So back stitch at the beginning, sew, and then back stitch at the end here. And then I will flip this right side out, and then I can worry about closing this bottom seam up. Okay, so now you can see my panel is sewn on, right sides together. You can kind of see the stitching a little better along this side. So my starting points all the way across the top and my little V at the bottom. So now I have to go through and trim the excess fabric off. I first did the initial set with my ruler, but I felt like doing it with my scissors, which is much easier. So let me grab my scissors and I'll start trimming this. Okay, so I got my serious scissors. I'm gonna come in here, and before I do anything, let me just trim off some of this excess to make my life a little easier. Same thing for here. I just find that this makes it a little easier to trim, but this is totally an optional step. So I will start at this corner here, and like I said, I want about 1/8 of an inch left over. And you really just want such a little amount because you don't want to have a lot of bulk in your seam. Once you flip it right side out. So initially you're thinking like, oh wow, I have this big gap. It's gonna be super easy to flip right side out. It is, but you have to pull this section through the inside of here because we've sewn this back tab or this back heel part together. So that's why it's really important to make sure you're back tacking and securing your stitch, because you do have to stuff this part through the other side. So let me get this pushed through here, and you can kind of start to pull it through. And so now I'm left with this crazy flappy panel. So I will take my point turner and I will come in here and just make sure everything is pushed out as much as possible, that I have a really nice flat seam at the top. And you can use a regular stiletto, but I feel like it's a little sharp for this. So this wooden one is really, really great. I love it. It doesn't rip through my fabric or tear anything. It lets me push everything out and I don't have to worry about my seam ripping open or anything of that nature. And so I'm gonna now take this over to my ironing board. And the one thing that I really want to pay attention to when I'm ironing is I want to make sure that my seam looks like this, that it doesn't look rolled over, doesn't look rolled over the other way. I want it to be really flat so I can get a really nice crisp seam. Okay, so I have my wool pressing mat, which is my absolute favorite to press on. And I am just going to bring this over here and slowly start to press. So you can see this instantly wants to roll up, which we don't want. So what I will do is I will start ironing my seam line first to really make sure that I'm not getting that weird fold over that top seam. So you can see this is rolling forward just a little bit. I'm just gonna bring it back, get a good press. I would rather have the dark side leaning over versus the light side, because when you look at your panel, you want it to look like this, where you're getting that really nice line. Versus if you look at this side that we didn't iron, you can see how this is all folded up. I prefer this look. And I'm going to do the same thing with my quilted panel. I'm going to get this onto my lining, my inner fabric, and I am going to stitch from here all the way around to here, back stitching at both points and then flipping this right side out. So once it's all done, this is what it will look like, and you'll have this open seam here at the bottom. Okay, so now that I have my panels complete and I have my tongues complete, I'm going to come back in with my stencil and mark all of the lines where I'm going to punch or sew. I did mark inside which was my left and which was my right. So this is my right side here. And you just want to lay it out and make sure everything is looking good. And I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to start marking my stitch holes, and I really want to line it up to the top as best as I can and then go through and start marking, and then same thing with this side here. So I will start on this side, centering the V as best I can. I'm gonna come through with a little pink marker. The one thing that I'll say is because my front fabric is so dark, I really don't have to worry about any marks going through. So that's a bonus. But if you are working with a lighter fabric, you just wanna be cautious of marking these dots. You don't want it to bleed through to the other side. So definitely go with the invisible marker, or you can use something that is potentially washable. Okay, the one thing I would recommend is when you have your panels all together, you have everything marked, you're ready to start punching your holes for your shoelaces, I would go around and do a 1/4 inch stay stitching or whatever you want to call it on the border, just to kind of strengthen this up, and then you can sew your bottom piece together as well. So you can see I've done that here, and I've also done this on my tongue pieces as well. Once you have that together, so you'll have your 2 side panels, 2 tongues, and we can go ahead and start punching these holes now. Okay, so this is my eyelet tool. It comes with 4 different pieces to fit inside here depending on what you're doing. So if you're punching your hole, your piece that's actually going in should be shaped like this, and then it should be the open spot where this is going to fit in to cut your hole. So if you're using the same one as me, this is going to be uppercase H and lowercase h. And I will go ahead and get these loaded into my eyelet punch. Once this is loaded, I highly recommend taking any scrap fabric that you have to do some test punches. You can see I did my one eyelet here, but highly recommend to go in and practice this because it does take a little bit of effort, and you just really want to be comfortable with the quality of your punch and making sure that you're knowing how hard to press and everything like that. So definitely get some practice in. Okay, so now that I'm ready, I brought my template back over because I did mark my dots, but it's a little hard to tell down here which is going to be a stitch hole and which is actually going to be a shoelace. So I have 5 holes, so I can do the first 5 starting here. and I'm going to go ahead and put the eyelet punch in. So this isn't going to actually make a hole. This is what we're going to use to actually install the eyelets or grommets, whatever you like to call them. Okay, so now that that's secure, I'm gonna go with this brassy color for my eyelets. So I will just slide a couple of these out. And I would recommend also doing this as a test for yourself as well on a scrap piece, just to make sure you're really comfortable. So you'll pop it in there, and I like to kind of load it on and then come in with the back piece and slide it. I know this is kind of hard to see. Slide it in. Let me see if I can get a good shot of this. Let me just get this on here. So I have that little metal piece already on there. I'm gonna go ahead and give that a really good press. And so that is what it looks like. So continue doing these for each hole that you punched. Now that you have your panels sewn and you're getting ready to attach these to the soles of the shoes, there are a couple preparation steps that can ease the sewing process. And so what I would recommend is you can either use a stiletto or you can use a seam ripper. The first part is you're going to want to go through and make sure that these stitch holes that are around this bottom of the sneaker are fully punctured through the whole way. So when you're sewing it, you're not having to make that puncture, and this will just make it a lot easier to sew together. These I've all done, so you can see the inner markings here. Previous to this, you couldn't see that. So definitely an important step to give your hands a break while you're hand sewing this. The other flip side to that is you can take your quilted panels and actually do the same thing, and you can just go ahead and poke through on all of those stitch dots that you've made. So I've actually made mine on the inside. It's probably a little bit easier to do it on the outside for when you're actually going through and attaching the sole. You can see where it's going to be lining up. It's going to be pretty hard with the dark fabric that I chose, so I opted to do mine on the inside. So you'll just go through all of your panels and pre-poke that hole, and this will just make your life so much easier when you're going through and doing the actual stitching. So you're going to go in through that marked hole with a little carrot. You're gonna pull this through, and you're gonna leave about maybe 3 inches extra inside your sneaker here. Eventually at the end, you will come and trim this and burn it so it stays and doesn't break or doesn't ravel apart. So then you're gonna come back, you're gonna stitch backwards into that next hole. And then just make sure you have pulled both tight, and then you will come back into the original hole and pull that through, and that helps make your locking stitch, so you can give that a nice gentle tug, and then you will continue down. So in this first section, you're going to have your 2 stitches next to each other, but from all stitches at this point going forward, you're going to skip every other stitch, and I'll show you what I mean by that. This thread loves to go rogue and get tangled on things, so just make sure you have everything out of the way. That's sitting in there nicely. So I'm going to come back into my next hole here, and skipping this, I'm going to continue to move forward. And at this point, you can take out your pin now that we have this in here. Continue pulling this through, and I'm going to move down. So you can see I am leaving a gap. It will be a little bit more visibly noticeable once I pull this through. So let me pull this through. Give this a nice little tug. So I'm going to be skipping this section, basically every other section through the entire sole, because we will come back and stitch that later down the line.